Delighted to move on to our second session. I think the first one was really interesting, and I've picked up a number of conversations over coffee, and I know the sessions that follow will be equally engaging. We kind of move the focus slightly, and this one is towards people, place, arts, and engagement. Delighted that our speakers include Susie Cahn, and Alexander McMaster. Karina, Lynch Charles, Heather Bothwell is here, and via a pre-recorded message, Ian Wilson, the composer. And then finally in this session, two other speakers, Tom Jefferies and then Anna Lardi. Please come in. So these 4 sessions will look at different aspects of people, place, arts and engagement. I think we'll find that they pick up some of the threads of discussion we've already had. So we'll begin by inviting Susie and Alexander, please. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name's Susie. I and Alex, I would say, are slightly edge dwellers to who you've heard speaking, and I find edges in ecological sense are extremely fertile places. So as an edge dweller, I just want to say hello and check in with the audience a little bit, just to say, how are you? You know, you all right? Do you want to settle in yourselves again? Anyone just got the coffee? Are you doing all right? Is anything like pushing, activating you in different ways? So any moment that you just want to take to just go, all right, how am I here after coffee? Am I here in the room? How am I after hearing that? Am I, excited, annoyed, asleep, whatever? Just check in with yourselves. Okay. And that helps me just see you a little bit as like other people having other experiences. Otherwise I get a bit scared talking to audiences that are a bit anonymous. So we are is this thing going to do a thing? Yeah, so we are a project that is funded under the Creative Ireland Fund. So we're going to tell you a bit about that. And but I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself and Alex separately. Is that we both are actually kind of edge dwellers, and I mean by that as a for myself, a lot of that idea that we are separate from nature, or we are everything is siloed or fragmented, never made sense to me from childhood on. I had no idea what everyone was talking about for various reasons. And so that notion that nature was separate from me made no sense then and doesn't make sense now. And even the language that calls it something else makes no sense to me. It's like, it's me, it's you, it's us, it's the world. And that's a world view of children still, and it's a worldview of our indigeneity and our indigenousness. And those are things that have been fragmented and actively repressed so as that other narrative would work, so the extractive narrative would still keep happening. So I guess where I found my place to work, it's in the level of community and arts and permaculture and other places that people talked in whole ways. Because communities are whole systems and they're really complex. And one of the check-in things about checking in with you is that you live in one. You live in a complex system. When people say, I can't handle complexity, it's really difficult. It's like, yeah, well, if we took each of you apart into lots of little pieces and set you into lots of Petri dishes and tried to understand your body, well, first of all, you'd be dead. And second, and we wouldn't be able to put you back together again. And you'd only understand little bits. Right, there's an eye, there's something. Where's that connect to? I don't know. So, but yet we know how to take care of a complex system. Like, it's really basic stuff. I need some food and water, sleep and company, and love. So I think for me, it's about trying to find simplicity in the complexity, which is different than saying it's complicated and I will oversimplify the problem. It's totally different. Complexity and complicated, different roots, different words. So the Shifting Tides project's quite hard to talk about because it's so complex. So we decided we would just bring you some images and some video. So it's a project that's connecting the two communities on both sides of the invisible border in Carlingford Lough, around the lough, and it's using practical ecology, creative arts, citizen science, and heritage and stories and oral lore of the area. So this may work. What do I do now? Yeah.
Quite shallow, and there is a certain portion that's exposed twice a day whenever the tide flows and ebbs and runs. But much of the loch, and of course much of the sea around our coasts, is largely invisible. A really important part of this project is making that.
Okay, I'll go back one. I can hear it within this, but I can't hear it within your system. Did it work when you played it earlier, Michael? Okay, so let's just do the images. So we'll talk over the images in a minute.
The waters in Carlingford Loch are quite shallow, and there is a certain.
Not through this system here.
Whenever the tide flows and ebbs and runs. But much of the loch, and of course much of the sea around our coasts, is largely invisible. A really important part of this project is making that invisible underwater world more visible.
Shifting Tides is engaging through the arts with the community. So the whole concept that we were responding to from the Creative Ireland Climate Action Fund is that the arts give us a whole other way to explore our sense of place, our communities, and the actions we might want to take to protect and preserve things into our future.
We're going to be running some sessions on citizen science, which are going to take people down. The waters in Carlingford Loch are quite shallow, and there is a certain portion that's exposed twice a day whenever the tide flows and ebbs and runs. But much of the loch, and of course much of the sea around our coasts, is largely invisible. A really important part of this project is making that invisible underwater world more visible.
Shifting Tides is engaging through the arts with the community. So the whole concept that we were responding to from the Creative Ireland Climate Action Fund is that the arts give us a whole other way to explore our sense of place, our communities, and the actions we might want to take to protect and preserve things into our future.
We're going to be running some sessions on citizen science, which are going to take people down to the shore and help them to learn different ways of identifying, recording, mapping creatures that they find washed up on the tide. This is quite an important way of understanding the sea, because we can learn a lot from what's underneath the water by looking at what's been washed up on the beach, and it makes that kind of knowledge really quite accessible.
Shifting Tides brings together that interconnection between the various disciplines: science, art, social history, oral history. And from that, from the stories that people actually tell you, you gain a hell of a lot of knowledge about the area. Not only its past, but how it's actually being formed and how it might actually go into the future.
We hope to explore all dimensions: heritage, present day, seashore, citizen science, what's going on under the loch in the intertidal zone, and what are the arts responses around that.
There's a huge emphasis on science, bringing in its own focus on what we could do to help the environment. As we all know, something's got to change. But I totally believe that art has its place in shifting that mindset.
So as part of Shifting Tides, we're performing our show. One of our priorities is to really reach out to the local audience. Coming from both sides of Carlingford Loch, the coast is a real key signal of how healthy our environments are. They're just very interesting environments where the tide is bringing up a lot of life that you wouldn't normally see.
So this place that I like to call the magic line, where salt air tingles and dances with the dust, this tidal zone that is retrieved and lended to us every 6 hours and 12 minutes, and then the tide comes back in.
So we're really hoping to engage with all of the communities we've already started before the project concept came about. It was inspired by communities around the loch that are already engaged in their shoreline, and we hope to keep working with them, supporting them. We also hope that local artists approach us. There'll be workshops. There's going to be a whole lot of things emergent and co-developed by the communities around the loch.
But we want to make this as open as possible, and we want to be able to call people to respond to these workshops in their own creative ways. We want this to be a project of emergence, so that we're really introducing some methods through which we can facilitate understanding of the sea, recording of it, working with it, all around the loch, on both the northern shore, the southern shore, and the entire body of water in between, and then inviting people to find creative ways to respond to it. When coastal communities have gathered knowledge and they can use it, it empowers them to be able to be involved in decision making and to direct the shared future that we want, not only around Carlingford Lough, but in coastal communities all across the island. And that's something that the Shifting Tides project really has at its core and that it wants to take forward as we run with this project.
Okay, there we go. So that's a sort of a broad stroke overview of the Shifting Tides project that we've been running now for the past few months in Carlingford Lough and is going to carry on for the next year and a half. And one of the things that has really sort of been used as an analogy throughout the project so far, and it really came about from one of our first events, which you'll see in a moment, which was our Symposium of Marine Ecology and Citizen Science in Rostrevor, was on that particular day, as has been the case on many days, Carlingford Lough was extremely flat and sort of gave off this sheen so that it was like a mirror. And very often the way in which we approach and perceive the sea, I think, is through essentially capitulating human versions of it onto itself, so that we end up with images of the sea that are ones of shipping and of fishing and of practices like mining and those kinds of engagements. You know, I started off this project, the very first thing I did was buy a map of Carlingford Lough. And when I looked at this map of Carlingford Lough, what I saw was a shipping lane down the middle, a border down the middle, aquaculture farms sort of stuck onto it, and we started to think, right, how can we make this, rather than a flat, planar space, a more voluminous and space that's more representative of what's really going on down there. So one of the first points that we're working from as we go into this summer is going to be working with divers to make that space more voluminous and to recognize the life that really exists in it. So one environment we're going to be working with to start with, and I'll mention it very briefly because I know we're short on time, are seagrass meadows. So in this coming summer, we're going to be going down with divers and snorkelers to map and study those seagrass meadows from a citizen science perspective. As we said in the video, this not only provides us with important information to then respond to, it's information that can be responded to from a community level, because it's information that's been gathered by communities and understood by them through their own terms, whether that be through science or through arts. Seagrass meadows are really important from a climate perspective because they're incredible carbon stores, but they also support an incredible abundance of biological diversity and biological communities. And it's more than metaphorical, I think, that kind of diversity in ecological communities transfers to resilience in those communities. And it's the very same things that occur in human communities on the shore. And we know for a fact, globally, that those kinds of ecological diversity support cultural diversity. So that's something that we really want to tie strings between through this project. So I think
I don't know if we're going to have time.
we're going to hop on
We'll
very...
tell you that it's on the website.
Okay.
Because of that little hiccup at the beginning, we do have another video, but we've got 3 minutes, so I think we'll let you go find that video, yeah? Oh no, Michael says we're allowed to play it.
Okay. This is a short video on the symposium that we held just a couple of months ago in Rostrevor, and this was really to set the scene for a lot of the scientific work that we're going to be doing with communities, and that scientific work is then, well, Susie will talk about how that's leading into arts work starting this weekend.
Today we're in Rostrevor on the northern shore of Carlingford Lough for our Shifting Tides Citizen Science and Marine Ecology Symposium. And we have invited members of the communities from all around the Lough to gather together with experts from around the island, academics, community activists, artists, and the idea is to bring all these groups together to provide them with ideas, access to skills, to build capacity, to activate these communities towards collective action that's focused on the underwater world in Carlingford Lough.
So the whole concept that we were responding to from the Creative Ireland Climate Action Fund is that the arts give us a whole other way to explore our sense of place, our communities, and the actions we might want to take to protect and preserve things into our future. We hope to explore all dimensions: heritage, present day, seashore, citizen science, what's going on under the loch in the intertidal zone, and what are the arts responses around that. So we're really hoping to engage with all of the communities. We've already started before the project concept came about. It was inspired by communities around the loch that are already engaged in their shoreline, and we hope to keep working with them, supporting them.
We're really curious to see how this is going to work here. Like, what would get the communities on both sides of the loch here working together better? What would unite the diving community, the farming community, people who've got nothing to do directly with the loch but enjoy it? Like, what kind of things would bring people together? We're interested in different creative approaches. We're interested in the voice of artists in all of this, that they can bring a different perspective, a different way of seeing things. They can also help us to have some of the difficult conversations, because there are going to be difficult conversations to be had. And they're also just a more enjoyable way of grappling with these issues.
What it strikes me, and I see this time and time again, we've so much science going on and it's brilliant. So much data, it's fantastic. But there are gaps in how we communicate that. And I've seen so often that the arts is definitely the way to do this. And not in a kind of window dressing way. It needs to be something that really is fundamental to artistic practice, so that people actually feel they're not there to design something to just show off a particular project, but they actually feel really invested in the artistic practice as part of the project itself. And I feel that's really, really important.
We know in ecology a diverse and interconnected ecosystem is a resilient one, and the same can be said for communities. And whenever communities are so closely tied to their local natural spaces, whether that be on the land or the sea, that kind of community resilience is also built up through connections and diversity. So what's happening today, and what we've really wanted to happen, is the ignition of these conversations. So people are talking to one another, they're talking to each other between different communities around the loch, they're engaging with community members who've come from other parts of the island, so that different groups can inspire each other and come together with different ideas and projects. And that's something that we're starting to see emerge through today's event. And that's going to lead into a series of workshops now in the coming weeks, where people can be equipped with the skills to carry out their own research around the loch, to gather an understanding. And it's that understanding, whether it be through science, or whether it be through the arts, or whether it be through other means that we have yet to uncover, that people can build an understanding upon which to activate themselves toward collective action around Carlingford.
So I think that's us out of time. But I guess all of that's premised on the idea that we believe that if things are not happening locally, we're not going to get where we need to be. And so that complexity, and I've been somebody who's worked in community arts and local community development and lots of community gardens and lots of other local things, and a lot of people in the policy space find it too confusing. You know, it's like coming into someone else's family and going, oh, that's my brother and he married the other one, but then this happened, you know, but I love that in community, because that diversity that Alex is speaking about is the riches that we need. It's that all these edge dwellers who maybe didn't, like me, I end up in institutions for very brief periods, because eventually someone finds out what I'm up to and stops me doing it. And so, because I'm interested in the leverage points, I'm interested in, just to finish up, to quote Leonard Cohen, and, the cracks where the light gets in is another way of talking about where the leverage points are. So I'm, this career, the lady asked me, in your career, did this happen? And I'm like, oh no, my career's been like this, because I'm just looking for those cracks. And if they start closing and someone's kind of going, yep, that was a brilliant thing that, they created the Creative Climate Action Fund, and it ends in 5 years' time. It's like, I'm off. Who else is opening a crack, that we can get in? And that's to try to bring and empower not just communities, but young people like Alex, who have a different voice and another kind of edge dwelling, who when I was, Alex's age, I couldn't get in anywhere. So there is some hope to me that people like us are getting a little bit more of a voice and a little bit more of a project and a lot more money for this project, because that says to me something's shifting. Because if you're bringing some of those edge dwellers in, then something's changing. So that's us. And we're going to be on a panel, and you can ask us questions.
And just to promote,
yes, please.
If you are interested in keeping up with the project, there's a QR code here, or go onto our website, theshiftingtides.org, and you can, if you fill out the expression of interest form, you will receive email updates on all our events, workshops, things that are happening. And speaking of events and workshops, this Sunday in Omeath, we're hosting a meeting for socially engaged creatives. Now that we're have really set the scientific foundation, or started setting it, we want to start asking artists to respond. So this weekend, Sunday at 10:30 in Omeath, in the Dolman Centre. You'll find all the information on the website. There's that event. And follow us on Instagram, hashtag Shifting Tides Project. Thanks very much.
I'm going to be very cheeky and just say that we have begun with the arts as well. You saw Samuel. I just wanted to say that show where Seaweed dances will return to Carlingford after the couple who made the show have had their baby. But they foraged their set from the shore. They wove in an oral history of a woman who had talked about the foraging they did on the shore as children, who's dead since COVID. And they foraged and taught seaweed foraging and brought that entire audience into the show about a seaweed forager and a seaweed creature.
So GAE of a Carja to Looker Urim an Shot and You, Live Goler La Reach 24. Hello everyone, I'm so delighted to be here today with you all for the Reach 24 Festival. I want to thank Michael, Lindsay and his team for, I suppose, reaching out and for all the work that they've put into this inaugural festival. It's already inspired me, this festival. I went to Ingrid's exhibition last night and it was just fantastic. Single-use plastic. I was harping on about it last night and I'm like, look it, we got to tackle this. And this idea that the fountain of life came to my head today with these refillable glass bottles in every shop in Cavan, maybe to start off with. And if anyone was interested in something like that, just reach out afterwards. I want to flesh it out. That's the artist's mind, always thinking of new ideas and where we can go and what we can do. I'm the project manager for one of Creative Ireland's climate action projects. We're called Restoring Cavan's Boglands. As Tanya mentioned earlier, we're one of the one-year programmes and we're just over halfway through this programme. We're based in County Cavan. We're on the border, but we're in South Ulster. You mentioned edge dwellers. There is no edge dwellers like the liminal space of a bog. We're so delighted. We have contemporary classical composer Ian Wilson, who teamed up with West Cavan Bogs Association, and we have Heather Bothwell here as a representative for West Cavan Bogs Association. I was going to let Ian tell you about the project in his own words. Are you ready? We might be nearly good to go on that. And then after that, I'm going to invite Heather to come up and to talk to you a little bit about the work of West Cavan Bogs Association and what they've been doing. So this video, Ian's away in Belgrade. He works a lot internationally as a contemporary classical composer, and this is his message to you. I'll also talk a little bit over the video.
Hello everyone, my name is Ian Wilson. I'm a composer and I'm the project lead on Restoring Cavan's Boglands. This is a project funded through the Creative Ireland Climate Action Fund. These are artist-led projects which are meant to result in behavioural change among members of the communities that the projects take place in. In West Cavan, where I live, there is a lot of bogland, and much of it has fallen into a state of disuse and disrepair. It's been drained historically, but basically a lot of this stuff is just lying empty, and if restored, it could really help on a small scale in the fight against climate change. So what our project is doing is through a series of public information meetings and a series of visits to already restored bogland, we are trying to show interested parties what restored bog looks like, what the process is, and we're involving experts such as Heather Bothwell and Francis Mackin, ecologist and hydrologist, so that they can give advice and help to people who might want to make these changes to the land that they own. Parallel to this, which is really the meat of the project, I'm doing an artistic project where I'm making field recordings on bogland, both restored and drained at different parts of the year, to try and create some kind of, I suppose, audio record of how those places sound. And eventually this will all be edited and processed into a tape part, and then I'm going to be writing a piece of music involving 2 other musicians to go with this. And I suppose the idea is that it creates some kind of parallel to the journey we're hoping some people will make with their own bits of bogland.
Okay, so that's Ian, and something that we did on the last day, this was just a photograph of one of our public meetings, something we did on the last bog trip was to invite people to actually take their phones out and record the sounds of the bog, and those sounds that those people have recorded are going to be included in a soundscape. This is music by Ian. This was our first trip to Killycunny Bog. It's restored bog in County Cavan, in the east of the country. It's a project that's been ongoing for about 10-15 years. It's had its ups and downs, it's had its challenges, but really what it showed us was that by working together and also by informing, educating and talking, bog restoration is a possibility. We took a bus of people up to Killycunny Bog, and this was Jim Fitzpatrick. He was the farmer who actually set out the whole project and kind of got all the different parties in East Cavan talking. And we had 2 different groups on the day. We had some of our real strong boggies who went up to sort of one area of the bog, and then some of the more novices, including me, who went to another part of the bog. What was interesting there is you'll see lots of women. We often think of bog owners as farmers, but actually there's lots of bog owners who are just landowners that had a wee tract of bog with their house, or they inherited a bit of bog from family. It's not just farmers who own bog. So actually all of the people that you see there, Claire, the young lady, she owns bog. Kathleen, she owns bog, the lady in the green. Lily, the lady in the blue, she owns bog. Declan, another farmer who came with us, he owns bog and he'd never stood on it. He didn't even know where it was. So through this project, he's found his bogland.
There's plenty of sphagnum on the surface.
That's sphagnum moss.
Nice wet, spongy soil.
It can hold 20 times its weight in water. That was us vibrating on the bog to see how spongy it was as it's starting to restore. And that was our first field trip. There was also that educational aspect where Killycunny brought us into the classroom and they told us lots. So we had, I think, about 7 bog owners there on that trip, even though, as I would say, we didn't have any of the real-life farmers, the guys with the sticks and the caps and the wellies. But thankfully, we got them. There they are on our next trip. And I had Dimitri, our cameraman, has been called away and he couldn't do any footage for me for today. Something just came up. We actually, on that trip, we had 4 farmers. That was Jimmy Fitzsimons who said, "I seen things in the bog I never knew were there. Keep up the good work." And they were farmers who actually sought us out and looked for us. We engaged through lots of different means, publicity, posters, the local radio station and different things like that. We also looked at some of the wildlife that was there in the bog on that day, and that was in Gurley Bog, another bog restoration project. Another wonderful thing that has come out of this is our involvement with Emmeline Cosnett. Sounds in this are recorded from Bogland in Cavan.
When you think of the word bog or peatland, you might think of the colour brown, a source of fuel like briquettes or turf sods, the smell of a turf fire, or a childhood tradition of footing turf. Peatlands are often thought of as a treacherous, barren wasteland, wet, sodden, harsh, exposed, windy, treeless, with an association of rural, impoverished communities. The rich folklore surrounding peatlands has captured our imaginations, with the dangerous and mysterious characteristics of bogs, the will-o'-the-wisps, the banshee trees, the carnivorous plants, and the quaking bogs, where someone can disappear in an instant. The things that were lost in the bog, where archaeology and history remain in a state of suspended animation.
So like that, the sounds you heard just in that little piece, you could hear that. That's actually some of the work that Ian's been doing, taking the sounds of the hydrology of the bog using specialised microphones. He has sort of been working on this over the last, over the last couple of months. And what's been nice is he's gone out with a couple of farmers into their bogland, chatted to them. And we also have come across a wonderful guy, a local guy in West Cavan, and he has T-Boy Bog. T-Boy Bog is fantastic in that it has its own lake system, it has bog, but it also has scrubland. And what's actually emerged from that engagement with that landowner in West Cavan is his desire to do something that actually Heather introduced me to just about 2 or 3 years ago, which is about the curlew and the plight of the curlew. And his dream actually in that part of West Cavan, on that bogland and that scrub, is to develop another project from this. And he feels enthused and engaged by our presence in that. So like that West Cavan bogland, we've had our successes and our failures, and maybe we'll talk about that during the questions and answers. But I would like to invite Heather Bothwell now. Heather brings with her a wealth of knowledge. We call her a local biodiversity expert. It's a title she doesn't like, but when you're in her presence for more than 5 minutes, you know it's really well earned. Heather comes from an urban area, but was out catching butterflies at a very young age. She's since married a Cavan farmer, so she has a real understanding of the tapestry, the nuances of bringing farming and ecological and environment work together, integrated. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but about bringing together those two practices. Heather, come on up, please.
Thank you very much. I'm kind of short, so can you hear me now? For inviting me to enthuse about West Cavan's boglands. Unlike the bogs that we have been visiting, the bogs that I'm enthusiastic about are not protected. They've got no designation, so there was no way that the powers that be were going to put in restoration. They have enough to do. The Parks and Wildlife have a lot of problems, but it's not thought that they're not important. They're jewels. In fact, they're better than some of the designated bogs. However, the Parks and Wildlife told us, you need to work with the communities. It's going to have to be bottom up, and that is where the arts have come in so many times for us, and I'm so grateful for what they've been doing. And I mean, it is private land, so you are getting into the Irish psyche about it's mine, and we do have a history about like the Land League, and the field that play is part of our culture, and we do have a fear of poverty. So it is something that's deep in us about land. Now let me see, which button do I press? This one, right. So we have been dividing land up for a long time. These are maps from the plantation of Ulster, and this is our part of Ulster, this is West Cavan. And as you can see further to the west, they were really impressed, the people that made these maps, that it's all mountains. But the bit down low, they've all divided up very neatly into lots of different lines. And you can see the brown bits, these are the bogs. So we've been dividing up land for a long time. If you look at land ownership maps, you can see areas with these stripes. So these are stripes where families were given land to cut turf, to keep warm, to boil the spuds. And when you go to Griffith's valuation, you can see how the land was divided up. This dates from, I believe, Griffith's valuation, sort of the 1840s, 1860s, that kind of era. But we have to move on. We have to move on to dividing up land, not to do with fuel, but hydrological units. So this is the same area of land as I showed you in the previous map, but this is the way hydrologists map it. This is the way that the Geological Survey of Ireland are mapping things completely differently, and we have to encourage our communities to think that way. And to reiterate the basic stuff, yes, there's a heck of a lot of carbon in bogs. They compare it with rainforests, which isn't really fair, because rainforests have other brilliant things about it. I'm not suggesting rainforests are important, but bogs are important. We've got a lot of carbon there. And we've got a lot of water. And we have problems with water. We need to slow the flow. Bogs hold water. And hydrologists, that's their job, to work out how do we repair the damage we have done. That's why we needed Ian Mackin. That's why the funding that came through Creative Ireland was so brilliant, because Ian Mackin could come down and put piezometers, which is how you measure the water in bogs. Come and do that with us. Did that move? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right, that's water. Right, the people in bogs, of course, are really important. The guy to the left is my husband and my son, who didn't even know he had bog. He's a bit bigger now, my son. He now owns the bog. The people in the middle are 3 generations of the O'Neills, who've been so supportive to us. The older man in the middle, Aidan, he's cut bog by hand, all his life. The fellow in the hat, he studies his masters and studied bogs. So we're changing, our attitudes are changing, and the guy in the hat, Jim, he's been so supportive to West Cavan bogs. The people to the other side, I'm not sure where I've left or right, but anyway, the people with nets and basins, we had a bog day in July, and we hold lots of events to explain to people what bogs are about. And we're looking for dragonfly larvae, and they're impressive. Great big dragonfly larvae. So the other thing that peatlands are, because they're anoxic, archaeologists love them. So they talk about who we are, our history. So we, again, through an artist, a ceramic artist called Emer Crome, and she arranged through her own grant to get archaeologists as well, because she then created her own exhibition. So they came and they're starting to look for a tocher. And a tocher is a wooden road through a bog. So our bog has the remains of an old monastery to one side, and they put this picture in because this is relating to another Cavan saint, St. Mogue, and this is in the National Museum, this as reliquary, I suppose. And then the monastery near us is a saint called St. Bricken. So you've now heard of St. Bricken, who was the first brain surgeon, just so as you know, he was from Cavan. Now, this is what the landowners are looking at in the farming press. They're looking about the problems they're being faced with water quality. They're being told you're causing problems with carbon. And then on the edge, there's sort of this thing about carbon farming. But our farmers, there's no designation. They're not going to have help from the government. And so far, they're not going to be paid for their carbon. So again, it's only the arts that have come along and said, how do we interact with you? There will be support, and the Peatlands Community Engagement Scheme will help us, but we have to bring the people with us. This is what I'm all about. I'm a bug hunter. I am happiest when I have a butterfly net. And we have an insect called the Irish damselfly, which is can I say it's a border insect? Fermanagh, Monaghan, Leitrim, Roscommon, Cavan. I'm saying that in the best Cavan accent I can develop. And it's the insect nearest to me, a specialised Irish insect. Of course, we have lizards and lots of dragonflies. And again, we get the data into the National Biodiversity Centre, which is dots on maps. So there's me, tramping across a bog, doing large heath butterfly survey. Large heath, specialist bog creature, feeds off cottontail, hair's-tail cottongrass. So you don't get that out in the other fields, out in the grazing fields, only in raised bogs. The other two characters on the other side, they came down from Belfast. They brought away legs of some of the Irish dragonflies for a DNA analysis here up in Queens. So there's some Cavan DNA up here somewhere, and they're going to work out, what's been going on, because Irish damselfly has a very peculiar distribution, possibly to do with the Ice Age, which again relates to what? Out of time. Right, we're at the end.
So I suppose what we didn't get to say there, and what I'd love to say is, so this project like that, we have other footage that just unfortunately our media guy, as I said, was called away in sort of a short notice and kind of left us a wee bit stranded. But we've had 2 public meetings, we've had 2 trips to different bogs, we've had sort of engagement with landowners where we're going to visit them personally as well, to chat with them. 1 minute, perfect. But what we're also doing is we've Francis Mackin, who is a hydrologist from the north here. He has come down and he has laid, I think, 19 piezometers in Fartram Bog with the I suppose with the approval of the landowners. So it's been a huge engagement process where we've gone out to chat to the landowners. The landowners essentially have said, look, put those piezometers in. We get data. We can find out the hydrological year, the health of this bog. And I suppose like that, we're now also looking at changing tact and sort of deviating from the schedule that we had for Creative Ireland and doing engagement in a different way. And I suppose we can chat about that maybe during the Q&A.
Thanks for inviting me, Michael. I'm Tom Jefferies. I'm not from Ireland. Okay, so that's all there. What I'm going to talk today is about the work that we're doing in architecture. I'm an architect. Particularly hinged around the Future Island project that we're involved with, which is a big collaborative project between ourselves, Ulster University, Glasgow School of Art, the University of the Arts London, funded by the UKRI very generously, and it will eventually land in the Design Museum in that there London in a couple of years' time. It is supported by the Future Observatory, which is one of the Design Museum's offshoots, and involves 4 projects that are running in parallel, of which Future Island is one. The other 3 projects are looking at circularity in medical waste streams, that's up in Scotland, a massive community-based mapping exercise to look at planning over in Anglesey, run by the University of Cambridge, and some housing upgrade projects run by the University of Bath. Okay, so this is where I'm coming from. And we're asking questions about, methodological questions about what is design for, really, and what is architecture for. And then once you decide what it's for, how do you recognise it? And it is essential that research is built in as part of the design process. You have to understand the agency that research provides you in terms of saying, I want to do this thing, and here's why I want to do it, and here's how I can do it. The skills to represent and communicate that stuff are critical. And then the space and the methodology through which we actually articulate it is also critical. And we use a thing called the studio, common practice in design and creative processes. But you show it to some scientists, they fall over in amazement at the kind of things you can do. You can put up very, very out there ideas and test whether they're possible. Our students and colleagues are used to defending and really critically testing stuff through the studio. It's a brilliant thing. I think every discipline should have a studio system, personally. And then impact, right? There's no point in doing something if no one else sees what you've done. So it has to get out there in the world. And that world might be a community, or it might be the Prime Minister. Okay, so, you know, or other people. So there is a scope. And I was thinking about where I come from. You know, it's kind of interesting, the talks this morning. Right, I am from Lambeth. I am from South London. But I'm also from Loch Carron in Ross and Cromarty. So my childhood was spent navigating between Brixton High Street and Ardeniersken, which is a hamlet 7 miles from the nearest shop. Okay? Everywhere is urban to me. And I think there's a kind of interesting thing about the contemporary situation where the project, we have to explore what the project of modernity at a fundamental level means. I think the project of modernity means smoothness and lack of disruption. Yesterday, I tried to get to Rathlin Island to do a community engagement event, and the ferries were all cancelled. So I went to, we went to have a look at some peat extraction between, where was it? Arknamullen and Maggery, down on the southern end of Loch Ness. Northern Ireland has the ability to become a reference point for how things used to be done back in the day, right? Because it's impossible to see this activity anywhere else in the world now, or certainly within, you know, the UK and Ireland. It was amazing. Ferry, if you want to go and have a look at it, Ferry Road, how to trash a landscape, amazing, right? Anyway, that was a diversion. We'll move on. What is urbanisation? Right, we live in an urban society, and we did a piece of work looking at the Scottish Highlands. All of the Scottish Highlands is urban. We can prove it because of the behaviours and types of engagement that people get up to. How do we enable, support, and sustain and introduce radical forms of sustainability? Now, I don't believe you can careful your way out of a crisis. We're in a crisis mode. What are the fundamental big dial shifts that need to occur to enable sustainability to be embodied in the day-to-day activities of people across pretty much every sector? And it's interesting that the Financial Times recognises this as an issue, and I recommend reading the FT Saturday edition. It kind of boils down all the important information into one easily digestible lump. But the critical piece here is what culture is for in terms of articulating this transformation, enabling it and leading it. You know, I am a former punk rocker back in the day. I think culture should be agitational. it should present something that is radically different sometimes from the prevailing norm. And then people's minds change, and it becomes normalised and embodied. Within the context of architecture, where does architecture sit? The view of architecture that we're running through the studio that I run with Gary Boyd, who's a professor who's at the World Expo on the history of coal and architecture, looks at architecture as the interaction of networks, culture and space. Right? You can plug in whichever version of technology or science you like, and it informs, but architecture always happens. It's like art, always happens. There are just different modalities that emerge depending on the bigger context and the available technology. And we can see that through pretty much any art form you can think of. It's fantastic, which is why reggae music now is different from reggae music in the 70s. So, check it out. Right. What does technology, what does culture allow us to see that was previously unseen? This is Bankside Power Station on the left, which was the largest unknown building in London in the 80s. And I know this because I asked a load of people where Bankside, I did my thesis projects here, where Bankside Power Station is. No one knew, right? It's opposite St Paul's Cathedral. It was producing energy at the time, so it was actually kind of useful. And you could only get in through a long process of being asked, writing and asking. When it became the Tate Modern, it became the most visited gallery for a time in Europe. And it is now the 5th most visited museum in the world. It's three times more popular than St Paul's Cathedral. What has done this? Culture has done this. Architecture has done this. And I think that culture has this transformational power that is incredibly potent if it's engaged in the right way. And Bankside is, for me, in terms of European examples, it's up there. Okay. So what got me interested in the island of Ireland? Brexit. Very, very strange times. Very strange times. So we looked at Brexit and we modelled the live policy shifts through Brexit and tried to articulate those in terms people could get, in terms of the mobility of goods, north and south, and then stating those in units. And the football field is a fantastic unit of measurement, like the Olympic swimming pool, the elephant, the London double-decker bus, you can go on. So we looked at the carbon, how much carbon does Northern Ireland produce annually, right? If you turn it into something you can see, it produces 1 pyramid of Giza a year of soot. Right? And that's little old Northern Ireland, 1.8 million people. We put the carbon soot pyramid on Rathlin Island. And the controversial thing wasn't that it was generating 1 pyramid of Giza of soot. It was, you can't put that on Rathlin Island. It'll spoil it. Okay. But there are these things. Sometimes you need to do things to make things evident that are evident to people who already know, but they need to become evident. And it's this evidencing which is critical. So one of the things we do is look at collaborative futures, the idea of futures as a method of testing. And this is a workshop that we've just done called Transnational Zero Carbon Future Heritage Studio. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it was kind of interesting. It looked at the idea of heritage and net zero travel, net zero culture across 3 countries. So here, Northern England and Egypt. And we produced this triptych of kind of visualizations looking at iterations of potential futures, some of which were dystopian, some of which were utopian. So the one on the left is Egypt produces the equivalent of one pyramid of Giza of plastic trash a year. So we thought we'd add to the pyramids through their current production of trash, and so on, right? Anyway, this went out to COP27, was discussed at COP27 in a room full of scientists. That was very interesting, and connected our students with a global audience, and then went on to be exhibited as in a fringe exhibition at the Venice Biennale, which is the world's largest architecture biennale, where 350,000 people notionally saw this piece of work, right? You have to get things into fora where people notice them. So just quickly running through the project. Future Island is situated on Rathlin Island, which is an island off Ireland, off the coast of another island off the coast of Europe. Right? Don't know if anybody's been to Rathlin Island here. It's famous for puffins and golden hares, amongst other things. It's a complicated project. There are 5 work streams, so waste ecosystems, digital transitions, organic waste ecosystems, sustainable futures education and green policies, which are all kind of moulded together. The basic idea behind the project was to remove plastic waste from the ecosystem of Rathlin Island. So at one level, it's super dry, right? That's the intention, just to take this stuff out of the system. But first of all, you have to understand what's in the system and what are the factors that are driving this. It's run through a theory of change model, which essentially is a kind of loop, which involves widening out the questions and then focusing down on the questions to come up with some proposals and, I wouldn't call them solutions, but some proposals for engagement on the ground. And Work Package 3 will be running some design intervention projects on the latter part of this year as part of this, and there'll be other iterations of things that are happening. Now, from my perspective, what I'm looking at is how do we shift the dial on sustainability education, and where does that happen? And the answer is it needs to happen everywhere at all levels simultaneously. It's difficult, but it needs to happen. So we're developing a project which on the one hand is looking to develop a new MSc in green transition design, and on the other hand is working with young school kids to look at environmental awareness. And this is it's done through the medium of the tote bag, right? Everybody loves a tote bag. Kids really love them. I love a tote bag. They're useful. Parents love them because you can go to the shops with them, right? So the children are working to look at all these issues around climate change, resilience, etc., and iterate those through a series of illustrations that are done on tote bags that will then emerge into the world. We're cataloguing what the tote bags have thematically to see if there are things within the children in Northern Ireland that come up, and get symbols, images, and themes that can be shared more widely. Now, Rathlin, as I say, is famous. Everybody likes puffins. I have travelled many, many miles to look at puffins personally. I went to Unst, which is the most northerly island in the UK, to have a look at puffins. Difficult to get to, but worth it because they're just so cool, right? And the golden hare, amazing Rathlin resident. Now, what's interesting is the kind of various numbers here. So there are about 150 golden hares seen on Rathlin. There are a couple of 100,000 seabirds seen on Rathlin. There's currently a project going on to eradicate brown rats and ferrets from Rathlin, run by the RSPB. The rats were introduced accidentally. The ferrets were introduced to eat the rats, and then the ferrets started eating everything else as well. So there's a lesson about ecological management going on there. From my perspective, I question, the question is place overrated, right? And what are ideas of place? How do we actually articulate and understand place? Now, the process we adopt is to look at data mapping as a mechanism to take a kind of objective view of place, if that's possible. Data mapping brings all the data sets together, looks at intersectionality between those data sets and iterating and representing those data sets. So we draw the material actuality of a locality. So on the left of the slide, you can see the different types of Stone Age acts that porphyry was turned into back in the day, the Neolithic period, and the locations of those across GB and Ireland. More contemporary drawings, one of my students, bear in mind this is an architect, went out and drew all the flora she could find. Just beautiful. They're all pressed in a book, like a Victorian kind of exercise, and then turned into a framed thing that she's giving to her auntie. So, you know, all good. And then we looked at the globalized flows. How long have I got? About out of time, right. Globalized flows, Rathlin, part of the global guano trading system in the 1700s, right? It was built on batshit. Population up to 1,500 people. Now the population's 141. Looking at contemporary archaeology, the most dumped car in Northern Ireland, the Ford Fiesta Mark V. Right, there are 92 cars on Rathlin Island for the 141 people, and mapped all the dead buildings. And finally, we looked at how those complex ecologies are actually understood, captured, and represented. And this is a map, a diagram showing Rathlin being fed by all the inputs that go into Rathlin through that we could identify. And then as a mechanism to understand how Rathlin can operate as a lens to understand the whole of the island. And I think there is something here. We'll wait and see what happens. We're still in the middle of the project. But we are looking at unpacking complexity, looking at where nodes exist that connect things, and looking at connecting that to wider discussions. And that was the last slide. And bringing that back into the community, where the boat allows, right? It needs a bigger boat. And on that message, I'll stop. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael. Do I go like this? Yes. I'm going to be talking about two projects here, and both of those projects have outputs that are going to flow into a festival that is on next month in Galway, Galway City and County. One of them is the Galway Bay is Calling project, which is funded through the Climate Action Fund, a Creative Ireland project. And the other one is the Songs of Travel project, which is a European funded cooperation project. And I suppose in both cases, I have to say, we were talking about the system change or, policy changes in terms of funding. And I have to say, when we were looking for funding for both of these projects, we had the idea first, and then we went, how the hell are we going to do this? And it was wonderful that both of these funds actually were there, and we're looking for projects that were working in that area. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about who we are. I'm Anna Lardi, I'm the CEO of Music for Galway. Music for Galway is an organisation that has been going for 42 or 43 years now. It was founded because people back then felt the lack of access to really high quality classical music performances in Galway, and they decided, let's get together and make this happen. So 42, 43 years on, thousands of concerts on, hundreds of thousands of audience members on, we're still going, and one could maybe say, well, the mission really still remains. It's the provision of high classical music performance. The mission is also to inspire, and earlier we were saying, yeah, well, what are we trying to inspire people to or for? And would we have the courage to actually find something that we do want to do, or that we want to put what we're doing in service to? And that brings me to the project Songs of Travel. So, Cellissimo, which is the festival that is happening next month, was first supposed to happen in 2020. So we go back a little bit. And in 2018, when we were actually working on the programming of this, we had invited a Swedish cellist, Jacob Korani, to come and perform in Galway. And he said that he would happily come, but he would only come if we were allowing him to travel by land and sea. And we sort of were taken aback and said, what's going on? We'll pay you 2 flights, one for you, one for your cello. And he said, no, I'm not flying anymore. So this was a very, very successful, internationally successful cellist living in Sweden, not in the center of Europe, deciding no more flights. So it really left something with us. And we go forward a little bit. In February of 2020, we were running a lunchtime concerts that was featuring musicians that were living in direct provision at the time, so they were refugee seeking. And one of them came to me afterwards and he thanked me for the opportunity and just said, look, this is the first time that I feel I am me since I had to leave my country. So there were 2 issues, 2 big issues, migration and the environment. And I really felt we need to do something here. What can we do? And I was thinking then already at the next Cellissimo edition. And so that's where the concept sort of started growing in my head. And I thought, okay, well, if we want to do this, let's see if we can find some partner festivals who are like-minded. Let's co-commission music with them. Let's decide to all actually perform this music at our festivals. Let's do it in such a way, or try at least to do it in such a way that we heighten the empathy of all involved, be it audiences or accommodation providers or whatever, for these 2 topics. We would agree on certain commitments, green commitments, not just in terms of the production of our festivals, but it would go through even music, because these new commissions, 5 new commissions, some very large, some smaller, wouldn't just see the light of day at their world premiere, as unfortunately often happens, but they would actually be presented again, at least at 4 festivals, and we're all committing to finding new other presenters who will present it again. We would also try and get the message out further by putting education packages together that would be aimed at both primary and secondary school level. So really, really try and push it out. So we needed partners, and the first port of call was very naturally Jacob Korani, the Swedish cellist that had inspired us to all of this in the first place. He came on board. And you can see the other partners there. So this is Sweden, then Valdres Summer Symphony in Norway, the Piano Biennale in the Netherlands. And the 5th member is not a festival, it's a gaming company, gaming development company in Austria, who we approached because we felt, again, we want to get our message out as much as we can. And we've developed with them an interactive motion comic game. And Belfast-based composer Elaine Agnew has actually written the score for it. So the green commitments, just very, very briefly, we're trying to hit the biggies. The biggest one is travel. And yes, change your own behavior, absolutely. We never met. We did it all online. We met once we were successful, because we felt we were getting 1 million from Europe, and we thought we should maybe clap eyes on each other and make sure that we do trust each other. So we all traveled to Hamburg, slow, from where all these countries we met there. All the artists who are coming as part of the festival and performing as part of this strand have to come by land and sea. So then energy, we're trying to, in Galway, we have to get the venues that we get, but we're actually having conversations with the venue providers in terms of how their energy plans are and so forth. Food, we're only paying for vegetarian or vegan food. Waste, obviously, we're trying to reduce as much waste. We don't even have tote bags. We have no merchandise. Materials then also, we're trying to keep them as small as we can. Big banners, we're producing them without dates on them, so we can reuse them again when the festival is happening again. And accommodation, we've picked the accommodation for the artists in walking distance from the venues. We're paying a little bit more for it, but that's what we're doing. And we have no sauna or no swimming pool in the hotel. Again, we're very mean, but there you go. So now how we're all presenting our music and how we're actually going to achieve this empathy increase in our audiences and stakeholders is sort of left to each of us. Each festival is doing it slightly differently, and we have decided to do it with the inclusion of talks right embedded into the concerts. To give you an example, the opening concert of the series is going to feature the National Symphony Orchestra playing the premiere of a cello and piano concerto, and then that's going to be followed by a talk by Mary Robinson, former Irish President Mary Robinson, on climate justice. So after that, then we're going to have Shostakovich Cello Concerto number 2. It's a really kind of a tough piece of work to listen to. And then to soothe the nerves at the end, we're bringing in Mendelssohn's Calm Sea and Prosperous Voyage. So what we're trying to do here really is it's creating the mood and then getting the message in there. So that's one way of doing it. And there are brochures around, and you'll see at the back of the brochures our green commitments are there. We're given little examples, just small examples of what can I do, as in what's the difference between a plant-based meal and a vegetarian meal. Just very simple graphs for people to give them an option to change their behavior a little bit. So this, of course, was all based on highly skilled artists being invited and informing or influencing the wider audience. But we also, as part of the festival, wanted to have something, a project that would have the community as a much more active agent in this all. And I met with Dr. Maria Vittoria Marra. She is the outreach officer of the Atlanta Aquarium in Galway, wonderful person. She's a ukulele player herself, and she had already been also on this trajectory of using music to spread knowledge about ocean literacy, and she was just trying to do something in that space. So we got together, and very quickly, again, we knew what we wanted to do. We didn't know how we were going to pay for it, but then, yes, thankfully the Spark Fund came along and we applied to it. So the idea behind it, again, very, very simple. We were going to involve 3 community amateur music groups. So we would catch people through their common interest, which was music. We would get them to engage with the Atlanta Aquarium, learn over 3 workshops about the stresses on the oceans, the beauty, first of all, of the ocean. We had rock pool experiences, a bit like the experiences that you organized. And then we had them engage with Naomi Beryl, who is a cellist and composer, and she took all of their impressions and responses, took them away with her, and has written a piece now for herself as a soloist and the mixed bag orchestra. So there's a jam circle, a string group, and a choir, and they're all going to perform this piece, The Ocean is in Your Hands, as part of this project. And we're going to, that's the big moment now, just a month away from now, but it actually will end then in September on Culture Night, where we're going to get people together again, and we're going to get them to perform together again. And all through it, we're sort of trying to bring them back to what have we learned, and what is it that, what has moved us, and what might we do different, and so on. So where are we now? Well, we're a month away from delivering all of this, so it's a great moment. And I was sort of reflecting, what made it all? Why were we successful in these 2 applications? Because we were applying to funds that were pretty tough to actually succeed in. And really, I felt that in both cases, the concepts are simple. I hope you understood what I've just told you. They really grew out of organically and out of a real genuine concern and need of wanting to actually change something here. One thing I haven't mentioned when I was talking about the green commitments, we're having help from both Atlantic University, Atlantic Technological University with Galway Bay is Calling, and with the University of Galway with the other project, Songs of Travel, in terms of measuring both against all the green commitments we're measuring, and also measuring in terms of behavioural change. Now, the importance for us to measure, and the other festivals can measure back and try and see what happened in the festival before, is that we want to report not really just to the funders, but more importantly, we want to report to the public so that we can show that hopefully our measures have impact, and in that way be encouraging for everybody to actually try and do something. So that's it, really. It's like hiccups are unavoidable. Have really good teams, have good colleagues that you trust that they're going to deliver what they have to deliver, when they have to deliver. Good regular communication, note taking, not long notes, but just the action points to keep things going. And for us, a learning thing was really, especially with the community project, was we're used to working with agents and with artists and whatever, and it's all very fast-paced and whatever. So if you're starting to work within a community, it's a slight change of pace. So if you're dealing with leaders of voluntary groups and so on, you have to be very clear in your messaging, and you have to be there to support them when they have to go out and get the message to their group. So that's quite an important thing. So just to wrap up, at the moment, we are getting a lot of very positive feedback now that people know what we're about to do. There is the odd comment that comes in and says, you know, stick to delivering the music and don't be giving platforms to speakers with nefarious agendas and things like that. And I invite those people to please come along and join the conversation. They're the ones that we want. But really, ultimately, what we're also trying to do is to inform that large middle ground, because it's I think all of us might be slipping into non-caring, you know, when it comes to migration, and so we're all kind of getting tired of it now, and so trying to sort of refrain from that. Or with the climate conversation, that a lot of us might be getting anxious and nearly paralyzed, like I don't know what to do. And so give the information, give maybe easy things for people to change, but they can all make a big contribution. So whether we are actually succeeding or whether we will succeed or not, well, we'll find out when we work on all the data and see how the questionnaires come back and so on and so forth. So thank you very much.
So we'll again have a couple of questions and then open this out to the floor. Anna, long may you continue to provide platforms for nefarious agendas. I have to say, I really celebrate that. I suppose one of the things that struck me about all the talks is just, you know, and we find this a lot, it's very easy to win over the people who are interested in the kinds of things that we're excited about. It's the people beyond that, and I just wonder from all of your perspectives, you know, we find that people who are genuinely interested are easily convinced by this, but in the case of the things you're talking about, how are you reaching those harder to reach people for the projects that you're engaged with? So maybe...
Yeah, I suppose ours might be like that in Cavan. There really hasn't been Heather in the group. When did you set up, Heather? 2017, so that's very new. We don't have a tradition or any, and like that the guys have been up against a lot of, first it was anger with the bogs, but actually now what we're finding with the meetings is we have a couple of hecklers. We were actually prepared for a lot more, and I actually feel that the lack of heckling, of direct heckling, is actually sort of showing us that whilst the farmers aren't just ready, maybe just some of them are, but some of them, you know, aren't ready to make the change, that anger is somewhat gone in our region anyway. I'm not saying that's across Ireland, and that's actually really positive for us. It means that messaging that Heather and her group had been getting out, and now with the Restoring Cavan Boglands, there's sort of a change of tone, and even people have said to me, our poster, there's that kind of pink, gentle Heather that's kind of the, you know, the kind of overarching image, and a lot of people said, look, we didn't get to your meeting, we seen the poster, we seen what's there, we're watching you online, and like that, and a lot of people have said there's a real softness to that poster, and that was something that they actually really engaged with. So like that, it is hard to get the farmers out. But we actually have had, you know, a number of bog owners that we're chatting to, and that was what I was going to say. Sometimes within a project, the proposal was 3 public meetings, 3 bog visits, this, that and the other. We're now actually saying, look, we actually might need to change tact. We might need to actually bring the bog to some of these people. So that's why we've taken footage of all, we've documented our whole process, and actually part of it was to have this kind of idea of setting up a kiosk in the local farming shop, in the community, the local, going to the festivals now that are coming up over the summer, having a presence at all of them, and maybe actually as well bringing this information straight to the farmer's home and having a cup of tea with them in their house and saying, look, I know you didn't get to that bog project, you said you might be interested, or even if you're not interested, knocking on the door, look, we've a half-hour video, can we sit and have a cup of tea with you, show it to you, and then have a chat.
Good.
Can I respond to that too? I think I've always not wanted to be a missionary for another mission, you know, and not wanted to be an eco-preacher to anybody that I ever, you know, encounter. And so there's a model for me that I actually learned from breastfeeding a long time ago, which is that if you're the place where you support somebody's need, you know, so when I was breastfeeding 30 years ago, it was not a popular thing to be doing, and there was a lot of, actually women in particular, tut-tutting if you did it anywhere in public. So where I got most support was from a peer-to-peer meeting the need, and a place where I could complain about how difficult it is to make the changes that I want. And so, because if I complained somewhere else, someone would say, well, give that up then. It's awfully very difficult to make this change, so quit. You know, so what I find is going into communities, you have to be listening to the immediate needs of people, you know, and then be in service to them. And I think that's what you're trying to do with this festival and with the SDG network. You're trying to make institutions as large and as well funded as universities in service to the people who haven't got that. You know, so I think that when people appreciate that. If you show up not preaching, you know, but saying, can we offer you some empowerment? Can we bring university people here? Can we bring expertise? Because so much expertise has been captured by the corporate multinational sector. So many of our youth have been captured there. So it's like to bring some of that resource back and say, we've an expert who, like you've talked about in yours, we've got an expert, you know, in ocean literacy. We'll bring them to you, you know, and I think that the arts is the place that then is not preaching at all. It's inspirational and playful and experimental and and you can make mistakes because of that, you know, Japanese concept of, you know, the mistakes and the cracks, when I was saying where the light gets in, where the cracks are the thing, you know, they're the beauty that you're trying to share in the world. So I think it's not about necessarily going straight to confrontation. And I really think that Northern Ireland has so much knowledge about this in the arts. That, to me, is the riches in Northern Ireland in the arts, is using the art not in the confrontational places, but in interfaces. But it's different. It's not confrontational art, except maybe DUP, the opera, The Abomination. That might have been a little confrontational. You know, but do you understand what I mean? It's like there's another thing you're bringing to the table, but it's in service of what the needs already are. Because people say, oh, we need to motivate people. That is not my experience in communities at all. It's not about motivating people. It's about saying, you're totally worried, you totally want to be doing things, but who's got all the resources that would help you do that? And it isn't in the communities mostly.
I think Susie says a bit of a pretext for it, but we've started having sort of initial conversations in Carlingford Lough where there is one of the major ecological issues, I suppose, that people highlight is aquaculture. And we have different strands of aquaculture that are taking place. Some of them are family-owned local mussel and oyster farms that have been there for a couple of generations. And others are then external organizations coming in and farming mussels, and they're managed by bigger bodies that are, you know, Northern Ireland-wide bodies or Ireland-wide bodies. And what we found in very initial conversations between community members in these groups, with the sort of family-run organisations that people might take issue with, there are shared commonalities between community members and these businesses, because the businesses that have been there for generations really, really understand the place and really, really understand the land in ways that other community members do as well. So they have a real shared platform to build from, and so there's a place there to actually construct, I guess, more positive futures. Whereas the real tension and conflict then comes whenever we have these external actors that come in, and there have been real sort of loggerhead situations there that are really, really different, even though the actual, I guess, ecological consequences of either industry could be fairly similar.
There is a kind of sensitivity about just parachuting things in, which is kind of what you're suggesting. I think for all these projects, you're always, it's back to your point really, you're mindful that, you know, these things are better growing organically out of the community groups that they're in. I'm really going to use this as a chance to see if there's any questions out on the floor, if there are. John.
Said, oh, there we are. Okay, and it's really about grief, and especially younger people who are looking into their future, and the anxiety and the trauma is leading to grief, and how are they going to process this? And what I could see from being outside the arts is the arts could be a powerful way for that collective societal grieving of what the future may hold, or even changing lifestyle, what we may have to give up. And I've seen things like funerals for glaciers when they've gone extinct or whatever. But I don't know if any of you have thought about that, and it's just something that came into my mind while you all were talking.
Yeah, you go ahead. You haven't said anything.
I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there's a thing about critical futures, and actually being able to describe things that might not have happened yet but could happen, you know, and the various iterations of that, and to be able to test that and then communicate that to wider audiences, which is important. I'm naturally optimistic, right? I think we can, you know, there are ways of addressing the current situation and moving forwards. One of the issues, I think, is always looking at this as a matter of loss, whereas actually it's a matter of change. And, you know, if we can actually internalise what that might mean, and then decide collectively, how society as a whole can engage with that, you know, productively, I think there is a future there. But grief is it's an interesting one, and there is a lot of grief out there at the moment.
Just on that, after the two films tonight, there's going to be a panel, and I think Nuala Flood, one of your colleagues, is taking part in that, and she is talking about climate grief as part of that, which is really interesting. And it's to do with landscape and the loss of landscape.
I was going to say loads on it, but I very quickly was just going to say I came into the arts in arts and health and art therapy, so I absolutely know that the arts have a huge role in processing emotion and experience on an individual and collective level.
And I was just going to say, when myself and Michael had a really good conversation the other day, I might worked on a different project which was also funded by Creative Cavan and the Arts Council, and it was to do with nostalgia, that idea of grief and loss, you know, and we actually mapped a kind of a keen for nature, and keening was an old Irish tradition, and myself and Michael spoke about it, and we actually worked with Heather to get a lot of the sort of the idea of what was lost from our area in terms of biodiversity, etc., which is where the curlew came into my understanding and awareness. Something I didn't even know I would grieve, because that shifting baseline, because we never had it, we don't know to grieve for it. But Heather and her generation were grieving for it because they had lost it, you know, that idea of shifting baselines. But when we talked about using old art forms or traditional cultural tools like keening, that kind of thing, that's done the world over. It's not Irish, it's all over the world. Even somebody as recently as a few weeks ago said to me in South Africa, they would say there was a woman who had lost her husband and she wasn't able to cry, and somebody said to her, bring in the whalers. you know, and the wailers were brought in, and that was a woman who would say, oh, and John is gone, and she would process those tears for that family at that time that couldn't cry. So it's actually a tradition, and it was something, again, that was new to me. But Michael, you had done your own keening, and that was what you told me. Didn't you tell me that? You'd done your own project on that.
That's maybe a conversation over lunch, but yes.
Sorry, yes, yeah.
Yes, with the Irish Chamber Orchestra a number of years ago in Limerick City Art Gallery.
Yeah, so like that, yeah.
But I think there is something about well, I'm not an optimist, but I might be an apocalyptimist. You know, which is that the change might be something better. But I also think that there's a determinism that we have to be careful of about thinking what the future will be like. Whereas there's so much that's now. You know, I think that climate change has always brought so much of the conversation into the future. Was involved with the Transition Towns movement 15 years ago. And it's like it's either going to be like this, it's going to be like that duality again. Whereas there's every effect is here and now. The migration effect is here and now. The flooding in Uri is here now. The erosion of the coast. Like it's all here, and it's all here socially injustice, you know, and environmentally justice. And I think too much of what's coming is just fuels anxiety and disempowers people about actions they're taking in the moment.